On the show today, Ian Tennant. So Ian's an interoception, I can't even say it. You can help me with this. Interoception specialist, feeling on the inside and stuff, and does podcasts, does body work with people, does a load of stuff. Ian, welcome.
Hi, Mark. Great to connect with you again. I thoroughly enjoyed our light-hearted, fun conversation last time. So I'm hoping it will be the same this time.
I actually had a note in my diary saying, find that person from In a Sense podcast and make friends with him. That's what it said. And then I looked and I was interviewing you. So I was like, great. So I'm going to give you a number at the end. But anyway, yes. On with it. How do I say it? Interoception?
Interoception.
Interoception. Yes. You think I'd know that one out. Interoception. What made you get interested in that topic?
Well, there's a kind of a personal side to the story, how I experience what's going inside my body, which I think has led me down the path of wanting to understand that better and to see who else is out there in the world with an interest in this type of body awareness. And that includes, you with all the work you're doing within Embodiment. And then there's the kind of also the desire to help other people understand and express how they experience being in their body, because I feel there's a big deficit of that in our the language we use and the words we have to describe what's going on inside the body. I feel it's a little bit poor. So I guess when I was younger, when I was a kid, I would often feel things inside my body when things were really intense. So, walking through school and suddenly being really self-aware and notice you're blushing and then be blushing even more because you're blushing and feeling really hot and sweaty, and then it all gets too much and maybe even dissociating from your body a little bit. So I'll be hyper aware of my body at those times, and maybe hyper aware of my body when you're doing something thrilling, like, roller skating at the roller disco, or, feeling a rush of excitement when you're playing. But then in between those extremes of something that's really unpleasant and something that's really pleasant, I don't think I didn't really have any vocabulary or anything to talk about what was happening in my body. And, I remember when we spoke last time, you told me about your experience of being at university and being very good at intellectual, heady stuff, but not necessarily connected to what's going on inside your body. So I was attracted to practices. I didn't appreciate it at the time. I was just thinking, I'm doing something spiritual or meditating or sport that were bringing me back into my body and bringing me in good relationship and good alignment with my body. That then I was started to become curious about, okay, so all these practices have been around for hundreds of years or thousands of years. And they clearly work because people do them, but we don't have a good scientific understanding of, or an agreed scientific understanding of why they're so popular. And between different camps and different brands of practices, are there common themes? So, I spent a while in academic research, but more kind of subcellular stuff. Left that to become a manual therapist and worked for environmental charities on environmental health. So became very much kind of health-oriented, interested. And I was writing a book in 2017, and wanted to include like the latest research on around meditation and practices that clearly work for our well-being, and to see what evidence is backing them up. And I came across the growing field of interoception research, which is not to be confused with introspection, which is kind of looking inwards and thinking about how we think and self-inquiry and that sort of stuff, which is still quite heady. But interoception, which is, it's how we notice what's going on inside our body, feelings of hunger, your heart racing, muscle tension, all those, any sensation inside our body. So my ears suddenly pricked up when I saw that there were, researchers taking this really seriously and trying to kind of get a rigorous sort of scientific approach to seeing how the ability to notice what's going on inside your body relates to performance in life broadly. So that could be performance at work, performance in, mental sort of social relationships, all these things. And
the definition of interoception is?
Yeah, well, within the scientific community, it's poorly defined. But the way I would say it, because there's lots of nuances, but the way I'd say it is just how you notice what's going on inside your body broadly. So, which includes emotional things, which we count as emotional. So it's slightly different than proprioception. So anyone who's kind of done any physio or sports related, and that type of body awareness is the relationship of position of one body part to another. So, if we all close our eyes now and touch your nose or put your hand above your head, you know where your hand is in relation to the other parts of your body. So they call that proprioception.
Yeah.
Whereas interoception is other bits of body awareness. So can you, with your eyes closed without touching any pulse points, can you sense your heart beating?
Yeah. I remember when I started to be able to do that, like I actually couldn't at a certain point. And then I started to be able to notice it. And then I was able to over years of body training, started to notice it in more and more of my body.
Right.
And apparently that became normalized. I didn't realize that wasn't common. And I went to the doctor once and said, I just take your pulse. So it's more or less 95. And he looked at me like I was a magic trick. And I was like, well, I can feel it, but it's not a big deal. But apparently that's quite rare. I don't know. Is it normal for people to say be able to feel their pulse?
Yeah, it's there's a huge amount of variability, as you say. Some people can hardly do it at all. Other people are hyper aware. There's quite a fun piece of research that made its way to the national newspapers several years ago, which was looking at the ability to accurately sense your own heart beating and they studied traders in London, so people who are sort of gambling on the stock market and all of that sort of stuff, the City of London. And the theory was, or the question they're asking is, if people are more connected to their body, or in this instance, their heart rate, does that help them in their job or not? And they found that there was quite a strong correlation. So the traders who were better at sensing and detecting their heart rate earned more each year, so they were more profitable, and they lasted longer in that stressful environment. So, and I think the research came about because one of the researchers knew a trader or a few traders, and they claimed to be good at their job because they had this sort of sense, this sixth sense of, I can feel it in my body. I use that to spidey sense. And so they said, okay, let's put it to the test. And they found that there was a good correlation. And what you see on the other end of the spectrum, so taking it outside of the working world now, you see people who've really got a poor sense of being able to either sense or interpret, and they're two very different things, what's going on inside your body. Then they will struggle either to perform, manage their daily affairs. So that might come out in the form of social anxiety or other forms of anxiety, eating disorders, and lots of different health challenges are associated with poor interoception.
We've sort of answered what was going to be my next question, thinking ahead, which is why bother? Why have interoception? And I'm assuming it's something that can be developed. I mean, like the experience of people who do more of this, or is it just sort of something you're born with more or less of?
Yeah, well, there's my opinion on that, which is yes, it's something that can be developed, and I feel that I myself, it's similar to your story, have been able to do that over the years. But in terms of this scientific kind of agreement on that, I think it's early days. They know there's this strong correlation, but correlation doesn't mean causation, and it doesn't mean that it can be trained. And I was involved in a small study with Anglia Ruskin Uni to test this during lockdown. We tested if we could train people online to improve their skills of interoception using, techniques which you'll be familiar with, like a body scan and resonant breathing and so on, and to see if by just clocking more minutes each week, trying to train that muscle, like going to the gym, does it improve the skill of body awareness? And so there's lots of little groups of researchers testing this in different ways around the world, and it looks pretty promising. It's being tested for conditions such as for autistic people, adult autistic people, for eating disorders and so on, and for general kind of well-being and ability to cope with stress. But I consider it as, let's say someone who's blind and they develop sensitivity in their fingers to read Braille. That's something that I can't do. But if I was forced into that situation where I'd have to kind of spend the time wax on, wax off with Braille, and learn it over time, then I would develop that sensitivity just by doing it enough. And in my opinion, this is my opinion now, is that the research will hopefully show that by doing it in the right way, in the right environment, with the practices that have been around, meditative and contemplative practices that have been around for a long time, then we'll show that it's just a new way of explaining the same thing that's been around, really, a new set of language that aligns itself with biological understanding, that it is a useful skill.
Yeah, and you're using sort of traditional practices in a way, and I guess I'd have some doubts about that. And if somebody spent a long time focusing on their tip of their nose, for example, like a breath meditation, they'd spend a long time not feeling their body very deliberately, right? And then I guess the other thing is I've seen people do body scans, and they seem to be mostly feeling the skin, is what I realized. Because when I started saying to them, okay, now feel kind of deeper in and use your imagination with that, they were like, oh, well, this is radically different. So I was like, oh shit, you've just been feeling your skin for years. So I'm wondering if you have any adaptations to the kind of traditional practices, or even if some of them could be the opposite of that. If you spend all your time listening to a bell, that's still mindfulness, right? But you're not interocepting.
Yes, yeah, and I think that the cue that you just mentioned, what else, if you go deeper than the skin, what else inside your body? I think that's really the answer. It's sort of giving people that invitation, and you'll find it in some yoga class. Some yoga classes, they'll say it's a heart opening class, and they'll ask people to focus on their heart, which is in the chest cavity. So I think that there are lots of kind of practices which may have, or the chakras as well. That's another one that they're depicted as kind of energy centers, aren't they? Maybe sometimes people consider them to be radiate outside the body, but they're often drawn as being sort of aligned with
tension inside the body, right? And they're mostly aligned with sort of nerve plexus of various kinds, right?
Yeah. So I think these practices can be adapted with the intention of looking at different, I like the word, channels of awareness. And there's some research papers coming out now where they kind of list all these different channels. So it might be, the circulation and heart might be one of them, breathing might be another. Then you've got even temperature, into how we experience feeling the discomfort of temperature, maybe an interoceptive channel. But there is still some disagreement amongst the scientific community about whether it is coming from inside or outside, because even the idea of sensing your heart beating, some people say that comes through the skin. It's the heart itself you don't feel, but it's the pressure of the heart pushing against those top layers of your body, which you notice through the more surface connective tissues moving. So
there are some sensory nerves inside though, right? I mean, you have, like, for example, if someone's shot in the stomach, it's very, very painful because there are sensory nerves in the intestines and the stomach, right? Like, is that the case? Feel free to correct my poor science if I'm...
Yeah, I guess, that's right. And if we're bloated after a big meal or got trapped wind, then there are some, or you've got sort of irritation in your digestive tract or your lungs, then you would notice that. But you can sort of argue what is inside and what's outside, and is there really any barrier or boundary? And I'm sure those discussions will go on in the scientific community and the therapies and practices around it. But in a way, I don't think it's necessarily that important, really. It's the person's experience that counts, and whether it's being helpful, which I'm sure you'll agree. And it's just whether we're all happy with the terms and the classifications and the categories we use to describe what's going on.
Yeah. interestingly, it might be useful to you, though. I find yoga teachers have very good proprioception, and but it's the BMC people, body mind centering, who have the by far the most exquisitely developed interoception. And like to the point where I go, you just they're talking about their pancreas and their spleen, and really they'll spend an hour feeling into these very, very precise parts of the body, and they'd be well worth working with if you wanted to explore. You know how they sort of wire up top level meditators when they're exploring enlightenment. Well, this would be the equivalent. So
body mind centering.
yeah, BMC, Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen is the founder of that, and then there's great teachers in the UK like Katie Dimmock and various other people I could point you to. But yeah, and there's really disadvantages to it. Like, for example, over feeling one's emotions, so they become more overwhelming. Some people have these kind of panic attacks when they feel their heart racing. Or just today, actually, just this morning, a student of mine works with pregnant women, and she spent a lot of time getting more and more sensitive to her body. And her student was saying, is this going to mean that it hurts more when I have a baby? And I guess that's about physical pain, but I guess the same maybe for people in emotional distress, talk about highly sensitive people and things like that. Is that related to this? Is there disadvantages?
Yeah, certainly. And thanks for mentioning that, because what we found with, our pilot study and the groups I work with, that some people are already hypersensitive to what's going on in their body. Maybe they have got chronic pain or some kind of chronic health condition or trauma. I know you do a lot of work on trauma. So for them, it is often very distressing to bring attention into your body. And you could argue that, if you train someone to develop that sensitivity even more, then it may make them more distressed. But I suppose that the end goal, or where I would hope we're guiding someone helpfully, is to have a relationship with their body where they notice things and can use that awareness in a useful way when it's good for them, but to not dwell on things when it's unhelpful. And this brings it round to the difference between sensing and interpreting. So, someone with a fear of spiders may notice their heart rate increasing when they see spiders, and that becomes very distressing, and they interpret that as meaning that the spider is about to kill them, and so they run in the other direction. Whereas so they're sensing it as an increase in heart rate and interpreting it as danger. Whereas hopefully with improved interoception in a helpful way, they can notice that increase in heart rate and then transform their interpretation to being that actually my body's just doing what it's good at, which is drawing my attention to something important. And I've got the choice for how I want to react to that, and my body will settle down and into a calm state eventually, and the spider won't necessarily kill me.
Yeah, the old joke about sort of a good first date being roller coasters and horror movies, because your date may sort of misinterpret their fear as actually being aroused by you.
Yes.
But, maybe something in there. If you look at the sort of things people do, don't they? It tends to either be bonding over food, which is purely classical conditioning, or doing something emotional, like scary or exciting.
Yeah, and with relationships, starting as you mean to go on, because I can think of examples of when a relationship begins, and it may have all those elements you say, that that drama, and it feels exciting at the beginning, but then later down the line, does that dramatic arousal become problematic? And can you use body awareness and somatic experiencing and nonviolent communication to change things over time if you have got off on the wrong foot with someone?
I tell you a few Warzone romance stories, but it will be for another time. I'd love to hear a couple more stories of the science. Some of these studies. Hit us with a few more studies that might be kind of revealing or interesting to listeners.
Yeah, so there's some with animal studies as well. So I'm drawing a blank actually on that, but there's an interesting one on fear extinction in mice, that you can expose mice to to kind of a little electric shock on their paws and see how quickly they recover from that. And they've shown the part of the brain which is responsible for that. It's called the insular cortex. If there's mice with a problem with their insular cortex, then they struggle to recover from that stressful situation. So it does seem that body awareness, or the ability to interpret what these stressful events mean from our body's point of view, is really important. So yeah, I guess the point I'm sort of saying is that there are some studies in mice as well as humans. I think another interesting study is that it's very much linked to emotion regulation and interpersonal communication. This is something I'm interested in, and hopefully you, in terms of conflict resolution, in that people who report to struggle with sensing and interpreting what's going on in their body often struggle with interpersonal communication.
It's a remarkable link, isn't there? People tend to think of communication as something out there, but isn't it the interoception is a big part of it? Like, hey, noticing, I feel uncomfortable, so maybe they feel uncomfortable, so I want to help them out here. Or, those little social cues are not just visual cues of the other. There's an internal kind of feedback loop going on as well.
Yes, yeah. And is that internal feedback loop, again, is it helpful, or is it turning into a vicious cycle? And it's there's this one of the researchers I spoke to, she used this word emotion contagion as well, which is when empathy crosses over to the point where the person can't tell whether it's they are guessing what the other person's feeling, or if it becomes their own emotion that they experience as their own.
Yeah.
So it seems that the ability to enact what we think someone else might be feeling is really good in order for empathy and connection and bond formation. But if it goes too far, then it's almost like we kind of create a merge with that person, and it's hard to disentangle.
Yeah. A lot of my female students talk about that. There seems to be a particular gender link to that, without being too sexist about it. And sometimes I say it's more of a self-regulation issue than a sensitivity issue. I'm not sure it's mislabeled as sensitivity.
So when you say mislabeled as sensitivity, and what?
Well, people say I'm sensitive, but that's not the problem, is it? The problem isn't that they're feeling something. The problem is that it's overwhelming. Right? Or mislabeling, as you say, of not realizing that this is coming from empathy. And of course, everything is, all emotions are contagious, right? Like, this is one we talk about a lot in the Ukrainian trainings I've done. We talk about stress contagion and co-regulation. People talk about co-regulation. They don't talk about co-dysregulation. And they're just two sides of the exact same thing, that we feel and embody the people we're around. Like, we're both fairly chill today. This is pleasant conversation. There's kind of co-regulation going on. It's a little bit interrupted by Zoom, so we're not making proper eye contact. There's a few channels missing, but it's basically pleasant. Whereas if one of us was really stressed, the other one would get stressed, right? Like, that's just the thing that happens. And every professional who's worked the door or police, they're all aware of this phenomenon.
And it's how Hollywood works. That's why movies are emotionally important and moving. I guess it's how music works as well. Musical performances, they capture our ability to sort of feel or sense something that the person who's created it or the actors wants us to. How porn works, I guess it's again, we're sort of diving into someone else's world and imagining ourselves as them and feeling the activation in our body as a result. So yeah, I guess we're all at it all the time, and that's why we're social creatures. I think that's I don't know if you've heard of the 4E cognitive science sort of model.
4Es?
So
I haven't taken 4Es in a long time. I've cleaned up my act for years.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. I've been indulging lately in 4Es, but yeah, I think it's embodied, enacted, extended, and embedded. So it's embodied, is you understand what embodied is. Enacted means that we actually then take action and act out based on what's going on. Extended means that it goes beyond just me. It's sort of, as you said, it's contagious, or it's can go amongst a group of people, and then embedded. I'm not sure what the embedded one means, actually. I'll have to look that up again. But yeah, so it's going from this idea of cognitive science just being stuff in the brain to saying actually our whole experiences, the experience we have, whether it's cognitive or embodied, it's transjective between people, and you can't really fully separate any sort of communication. Or
we're a web. And
yeah, we are a web.
We talked about emotion earlier. What's an emotion? I've never quite got it cognitively. Obviously, I have emotions, very normal that way, but I never quite understood it. So, for example, it's different from just feeling, say, sensation like cold, but it's certainly an interoceptive experience, right? Like I can feel like, I don't know, I have stomach problem at the moment, so I can feel like a pain in my stomach. Yeah, that's very different. Or being hungry, that's very different than feeling sadness or joy. Like, how would you characterize the interoceptive difference between sort of mere sensation, physical sensation, and emotion?
Yeah, I think you may be aware of the work of Lisa Feldman Barrett, Professor Lisa Feldman Barrett. She's wrote a book, How Emotions Are Made. So her proposal is that we construct emotions on the fly. And it involves several different ingredients. So what might those ingredients be? One might be the body sensation. So as you say, I'm cold, or my stomach's grumbling, or my heart's racing. So all those ingredients go into the mixing pot. And then we've got, other senses from around us outside our body. So the situation I'm in. So, I might have a very different emotional reaction to you if we were sat in a field on a sunny day compared to if we were, in some kind of dismal, dark environment, wet, cold environment. And then the other one is the kind of the story we tell about those ingredients. And then she says, we then kind of label or categorize the emotion on the fly based on all of those things together. So I might call it, like you said about the confusion between dating and drama earlier, I might call a set of bodily sensations if I feel my heart racing and my stomach churning in an environment where I'm sat at a restaurant waiting for a new date to arrive, and I've got this intention that it's very important, and I might call that, nerves or excitement. If I had very similar sensations in my, my heart rate going and my stomach feeling like it's churning the day before a driving test or an exam, then I might, the story I'm forming then is that these are all due to the scary exam. Then I might call that anxiety or fear.
Yeah,
so
labeling hypothesis of it. Yeah, for me, I'm wondering if there's a sort of gestalt though that emerges. So I know there's the sensation and then there's the interpretation of that. It feels to me like that doesn't. I first got presented with that at A level. There's this classic study, is it Shasta and Singer, where they inject people with adrenaline, and then depending on the situation, they feel this emotional that. But it feels to me that's not quite all there is. It feels like there's a sort of subtler layer of interoception involved, almost like a second order. Does that make sense? Like it's different from hot, cold, pain, pressure. There's this second order with an emotion, which is physical, but is more diffuse, more subtle, but isn't just a labeling. Like it isn't just a cognitive labeling of, oh, my heart is racing, therefore I am afraid. It feels like they're missing a piece in the middle of those two.
Yeah, I'd agree. Yeah, I would. I'd agree because otherwise, how would we know to call something love or nerves for a driving test? There must be there, and they are. There's this idea of qualia, qualities or qualia. So yeah, I would say an emotion is something that is like a second order phenomena, and it's to kind of make us do something important.
Right, motivational as well. That's the other aspect of it. It's not just like, oh, I feel my foot or pressure on the floor, but it doesn't mean anything particularly other than there's floor there. If it was suddenly disappear, maybe I'd act, but it doesn't have a drive to it, right? Whereas
Yeah.
like, it's like fear, I've got to get away, or love, I want to, look after this person, support them, whatever. Like it does, this emotion directly seems to sort of pressure us towards a particular behavioral response, right?
Yeah. And I sometimes I just try to simplify things and imagine myself as a slug or an amoeba, and just think, how do I know if I want to move towards food or move away from a threat? And I think that emotions really are just trying to help us do that, help us decide whether to how to act. And there's some new, researchers coming, sort of saying that actually they're more fundamental, that our bodily felt experience, some of which are emotional, are more fundamental than our thoughts, actually. So I don't know if you've heard of Professor Mark Solms. He's written a book called The Hidden Spring.
Okay.
So he says that that consciousness itself isn't actually derived from the front of our brain where we do all our thinking and mental gymnastics. It's actually much more fundamental, and it comes from the brain stem, an area where
GPS signal lost.
Sorry about that. And so he calls it the hidden spring, and he said it is feeling based at its source. So consciousness is actually feeling based or emotional based or affect based, depending on which word you want to use. And it's then, so that happens first. So the emotion happens first, or the feeling happens first. And then we continue to make more and more abstract stories about it and try to make sense of it from the forefront of our brain. And I quite like that idea. I don't know if
it makes sense. It makes sense. Does interoception necessitate consciousness then or not? Because, you can see not only a person, a dog, anyone, have emotional responses, but not be aware of it. Sort of someone who's like, I'm not angry, and they very clearly have all the physiology and behavior of anger, but they're not aware of it consciously. They're just acting from it. I suspect this is the case with many animals. It looks like an emotion from the point of view of the behavior and the physiology, like if you were to measure the heart rate, adrenaline levels and things, but there isn't any awareness of it. So is that emotion without interoception, or is that not a thing?
Yeah, and that's a really interesting and good question. I don't know if there's a wide agreement on that yet, and I think this is the interesting kind of unknowns in this community, really, that how do we agree on what we mean by the words we use? And if it looks like an emotional response, do we call it an emotional response? Do we call it an unconscious emotional response? Or are they're still conscious of something, but they might not label it as that emotion, might not label it as anger? They might want to say, well, I'm angry at,
but no, they're completely unaware of their body at the time, right?
Yeah.
They're what they're aware of, like anger is particularly blinding, for example, to body sensation. An angry person's fixated on destroying a thing or person, right? Revenge, destruction, maybe boundary setting, depending on how we're defining it and the degree of it, positive side there. But the fixation there is not on interoception. Fixation is on the other. It's the same with like, sort of infatuation. I always thought hate and 16-year-olds in love have quite a lot in common, in that it's all about the other. It's not in, there isn't interoception, right?
Yeah. So the state, but is the state of the body driving that behavior, whether they're conscious of it or not. So again, this is whether, if they're aware of the other, they've become conscious of the other. So they're conscious of something,
right?
But they're not explaining it in terms of their body, but they're still conscious of what's going on.
Yeah, they're conscious of the external world, right? And we have a sort of limited amount of always think of it as almost like consciousness juice, you know. If we're putting it in, you see people doing a lot of meditation, and sometimes they're like so in their bodies, they're a bit weird to interact with, because like most of my attention's on you now, not on my butt, or my liver, or my stomach, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm interviewing, so most of my attention's here. There's a bit here because I'm an embodiment guy, and I think that's helpful and, you know, useful. But like sometimes I see it the opposite way. People are overdeveloped. You know, very again, their social skills suffer from a different problem almost, you know.
They can't engage in the way that we expect or we think is normal to engage. So
it's also the volume of it, surely, right? Like I heard these very silent rooms. If you ever had to play with one of these, you go inside and apparently everyone has to leave because they can hear their internal processes so loudly that it drives everyone crazy, and no one's managed more than a few hours in one.
Really?
So that sort of heightens interoception, basically.
Wow. So is that like a float? So there's more than one person in the room? Is it like a flotation tank?
Super quiet rooms. So there's rooms that are sort of set up like a sound recording studio, but more so.
Okay. And people, when they go in there,
disturbing about them.
And are they going in there for a therapeutic reason? Or?
No. They're used for various other experiments where they need zero sounds, but scientists apparently don't like being in them. Because if you're in them on your own for too long, you start freaking out because you can hear all your digestive processes and things.
Wow.
They're quiet. And, it heightens interoception to an unpleasant degree.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? That is really interesting because, sensory deprivation tanks are used to, I guess some people freak out when they go in them, but they are used, I guess, if you're expecting to go in to be soothed and to relax and so on, then it's going to have it's almost like the placebo effect or the expectation that you're going to benefit. Whereas I guess if you're going in to somewhere to do a work job or something, and then you suddenly notice all these distracting bodily sensations, then it might freak someone out.
Not sure on that one. What else do you think is a sort of a mystery question then in this field? What are the researchers arguing about, or what's the edge of this field?
Well, I think what the edge is the question you just asked, which is, what's the mobility between things that are happening unconsciously and things that we're aware of and we can possibly even influence consciously. So, and is it a sliding scale? How deep can we go possibly with taking these reactions which have been labeled as primal and instinctive reactions, gut reactions, and can we how much can we bring them into conscious awareness and start to maybe retrain them and so on, if it's beneficial to do so. So that like you talked about, that kind of reaction to flip into anger and to act something out externally, that can be really helpful in a life and death situation. You don't want to be sort of then tuning in and thinking, should I save my own life right now or not? But but there might be other situations when and this possibly with PTSD or just other with modern living as well, with this constant stimulation from social media and so on. Maybe it is beneficial to decouple some of these things that happen maybe more automatically in the background. Is that possible?
Do you think the modern context is sort of interoceptively toxic, like it's interoceptively blinding, perhaps would be a better way of saying it, in that I'm surrounded by devices that are so interesting, whether it's social media, all the little dopamine hits, YouTube, just so much information, computer games for some, porn for others. Like, it's so interesting visually and auditorily. Like, there's always something I can have in my ear, something fascinating being said, like this podcast, right? like listeners probably are not aware of their body while listening to it, unless we're talking about it. It reminds them certainly that I'm now deep in something, and I can have that in my ear all day long, just fascinating people saying fascinating things, and visual stimuli, like just an incredible degree of sensation. I played a mobile game for the first time in ages the other day. I just felt like a little distraction from all deep things. and it was like boo boo, and things were dropping, and Duolingo's like that. It's always like little coins and noises. This mental environment we're in, that's kind of hyper visual, hyper auditory, hyper interesting. I want to design that way, right, for profit, and designed to trigger us emotionally. I wonder how supportive of interoception that is.
Yes, yeah. So is it supportive of interoception? Is it kind of distracting us away, blinding us to interoception, as you say? Well, I think there's lots of people researching that and asking those questions at the moment. There's the Center for Humane Technology, which was aligned with the work. I don't know if you saw the documentary Social Dilemma on Netflix.
Yes. Yeah.
So they're doing a lot of research around that. There's a famous psychologist, I think it's Jonathan Haidt. He's done a kind of open source collaborative research project looking at, is social media helpful or harmful to young people? And they seem, if you drill down to like the subgroup of teenage female girls, then it's not very helpful. And I'm going to come back to interoception on this, in that it gives them a poor self-image, when they're looking on Instagram and no shit, no shit, Sherlock. But who I collaborate with at Anglia Ruskin Uni, Jane Aspel, she had a nice way of putting it in that her lab is called the Body and Self Lab, and she said that commonly when we think about our sense of self, most people will say, I'm a dentist or a farmer, or I'm a nice person, and it's that outward orientation. Whereas with but actually the research shows that at a fundamental level, what is going on inside our body, the state of our body, has more influence on our sense of self, positively or negatively. So if and we'll all have felt this after doing exercise, you feel uplifted and probably more positive. After eating too much extra pudding after a meal, then your body's in a sort of food coma type sensation, and that changes the way we experience ourselves. So it seems that yes, we can do all these things to strive in the outside world and compare ourselves to people on Instagram and develop all these labels for ourselves, but actually what's really going to be important at the end of the day is the state of the body. So the modern world, is it with the metaverse and all this hyper real stimuli and things that are mining us for our attention, is it coupled in a useful way to what's going on inside my body? I don't know. I've got a good friend who loves being in the metaverse, and he's a designer in the metaverse, and I posed the question or we had a conversation recently about, when do if I enjoy the metaverse so much, enjoy all this stimulation, when would I stop? And my initial thought was either when I need to go to the loo, or I get so hungry that I want to eat. So then it's your basic bodily needs that's telling you to take your VR headset off. And
there are like gamers who have bags on them so they don't have to go to the toilet.
You're kidding?
No, that's a thing. That's a
really?
thing with like computer obsessed kids, like diaper bags and things like that. Yeah.
So is that healthy or not? I don't know.
No, it's deeply unhealthy. It's psychopathic, and it's ruining the world, Ian. Let's be fucking honest. like the metaverse is pure evil, and the people responsible for it should be. You know what? I can't incite violence on this podcast, but let's say I'm against it.
Yeah, no, I remember before you said that you're predicting a point where the fleshies meet the metas or whatever it is, and there's going to be it's
going to be an interesting war, because they'll have all the money, but we'll have our bodies, and ultimately there's a plug somewhere. A plug is a very physical thing, so I think it's going to be a very interesting conflict when it does happen. But I suspect anyone who's not deeply immersed in the metaverse will be deeply in poverty very, very soon, particularly if you haven't had the AI upgrades that make you 10 times more productive than everybody else.
The AI upgrades.
I think that's a dystopian. Yeah, the chips in your head from Elon that are going to make you 1,000 times better at whatever you do, and you'll be economically completely unviable if you don't have them.
Yeah, so I'm with you on that, and in principle, but you know, in the spirit of playing along with technology, you know, I'm aware that sometimes it's used in a helpful way. So giving, you know, people who are stuck in hospital and can't leave their ward, and it's a very depressing situation, then, you know, if they're given a VR metaverse experience of swimming with dolphins or walking in a forest, then that might have a therapeutic use. So there might be a use for the technology, but then, you know, going to the root cause, you say, you know, if we could help people just be more healthy, no, it's not going to be possible in all circumstances, but how can we stop people going into, you know, spending so long in the hospital in the first place and support their bodies? So I'd rather focus on that. So yeah, I'm definitely with you.
So again, there'll be a case and they'll say, well, we have to put this chip because it's in the kid and the kid's disabled and therefore it's going to help them. And we'll all be like, oh, okay, well, all right, if that's what it's for. But
yeah, and does everyone who's not in hospital have to have it? Probably not.
No, you have to economically immediately, because if it's an upgrade, let's say there's 2 computer coders and one has the chip and they can work 10 times faster. They're now getting paid 10 times more, which means the other computer coder's work's going to be massively devalued, right? Mm-hmm. So anyone who has a cognitive job, and even emotional jobs, because there'll be, you know, a therapy chip to have emotional recognition and, you know, eye contact recognition and things. So I'm very worried about it, because I just don't see how, as soon as it's introduced, how it wouldn't become an absolute necessity, and anyone who didn't do it would immediately be outcompeted in any marketplace.
Yeah. I started a talk a few months ago at a summer camp on technology, the relationship between technology and health, and I started it by saying, I've got a confession to make. I think I might be a scaremonger, you know, by talking about all these things in this way, and I just have to get it off my chest. You know, I might be just a scaremonger, but I'm going to present to you all these these thoughts and ideas, because sometimes I do feel like a Luddite or a scaremonger, but you know, I'm not the only one. But there are probably more people in Silicon Valley, or, you know, more metaverse developers that are going to spread this technology quicker than there are Luddites, scaremongering Luddites like me and you.
We'll lose because economically it's okay. We're on a losing team. But tell me about the researchers, Ian, because I've come across some research before that I would call embodiment research, even if it wasn't called that, you know, by the academics. And it didn't seem like many of the academics had their own practice. And it seemed like they were sort of learning about embodiment. And sometimes some fascinating studies. But then also there's like issues with that. Like I remember seeing the replication studies of Amy Cuddy's work, and they'd completely misdone the poses. They were just different poses because they didn't have enough body awareness and enough kind of postural. You know, the difference between that and that, to anyone who is in body practice, is sorry, for listeners who can't see the audio, so the difference between being slightly shrunk and slightly expanded is a very small difference in terms of physicality, but quite significant in terms of the emotionality and the impact it's going to have. So I'm wondering, is the research field full of sort of enthusiasts who do Tai Chi in their spare time, or is it full of eggheads?
Yeah, again, very good question. And you know, there's a guy, I've forgotten how you pronounce his name. He's written the book on anti-fragile, and his latest book is called Skin in the Game. And it is this idea that, you know, it's no point being an academic if you don't have skin in the game, because you know, you're going to be always going to be way behind the people who are making things work in the world outside of academia. So I don't know. I do know some researchers. Sorry,
Tennant.
That's the one. Yes, yeah. Thank you. So I know some academics who have a they do practice. Jane Aspel, who I collaborate with, she's one of them. When she was at uni studying biology, I think she managed in her spare time a Buddhist center. So she was doing body scans and has done the MBSR training and so on. So there certainly are. people who have their own practice. But I totally agree that you can throw the baby out with the bathwater if you design an experiment and try and strip back it in a way to make it studyable in a sort of randomized controlled trial, or to try and reduce all the variables down. Then you can maybe lose the very thing that makes it effective in the first place.
Well, so what mistakes in the studies, right? Like gave the example of meditation earlier, like a dissociative tip of the nose breath meditation is going to create a completely different outcome to a body scan done in a way which encourages depth of feeling, right? Like those instructions may not be obviously different. The researcher might just be thinking, oh, they're both meditation.
Yeah, if they don't have an experiential experience of it themselves when designing it, or in the person who's delivering the intervention or instructing the intervention for the study, if you lose that, then you shouldn't be disappointed if the results come out showing it's not no good. I'm really interested in bringing together some researchers and to try and with practitioners and to do like a practice together where we talk about this. There's this idea of somatic circling that it's like a circling nonviolent communication, reflective listening, circling technique, where participants say, you have a topic and then you talk about it, the other person reflects it back, but then adding an interoceptive or embodiment component to that thing and going round in a circle. So to bring some academics into that and to try and see if we can arrive at a set of sort of understanding using a set of words that we think we're all might be talking about what we think we're talking about.
Well, fascinating to talk, and I'm sure we could go for longer. It's been much more of a conversation than an interview. Like, sort of listeners, do forgive me. Sometimes when the topic is, I'm really in with the topic, I kind of just want to have a chat than just to do a straight interview. So, Ian, I hope you didn't mind that. I've got across some good points nonetheless, despite me interrupting all the time.
It's been a pleasure.
I very much enjoyed your podcast. So that's In a Sense, right? That's the name of it. Have I got that right?
Yeah, it's only on YouTube at the moment. So it's the Inner Sense channel on YouTube, and it's got kind of a blue and pinkish logo. There are some other Inner Sense. So I'd love to speak to you again very soon and to see how your work's developing. We haven't talked about that today. But one thing I did want to mention actually is related to your work on sort of conflict is a guy called Manos Tiskeris. I don't know if you've come across him. He's set up a school for the Centre of Politics of Feeling in London, and he's looking at interoception and sort of embodiment in political decision making. So your work on conflict resolution and trauma, I think what he's proposing to take this into the kind of political realm, I think is really interesting.
Nice. Okay, well, I'd definitely love to get some more of these people on the podcast, Ian. So I'll give you my number here at the end, and if you could send me a few names for people to invite, then that'd be super cool. Anywhere else people go to find your stuff?
I have a website called Restoring Balance. So that's spelled Restoring Balance with no spaces .life. And I post some articles there, some about health in general, others about interoception, and they're the two main places.
Got a book out as well, right? Restoring Balance on Amazon as well.
That's it. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Ian, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Mark.